Most people think that being associated as a first-generation American or an immigrant is a death sentence, but it's actually a very competitive lethal edge. In high-stakes finance, while the elite are blinded by legacy sentiment, homophily, provenance, nepotism, your isolation is a good competing factor. It's literally a sterile place where you can test markets anytime you want. Legacy institutions and elites are run by an echo chamber where one domus says one thing and many other underlings continue on to say the same exact thing or same exact way he said it but in different words. That and the sentimental bias, the ability to govern by how it feels and the ability to say that there's nostalgia behind a reason to make a decision for any administration that you have. The sentiment is real because they value the nostalgia and the feel opposed to the real-time data that is making the actual gains and progressions like it really does. That would be, as you hear this video and as I'm speaking, a huge threat. The sentiment is such a bad thing. Unlike the elites and many others who are completely sentimental and revolving around sentiment and provenance and nepotism, people who are first-generation Americans and immigrants, but in this case first-generation Americans, are really objective. They aren't a part of the homophily, the reason and tendency to be aligned with other people who are similar to themselves because they don't need to be. They are very open about their ability to make money. On a side note, in social media, if you aren't really a homophilistic person where you are aligned with people who are most like you wouldn't be able to utilize the algorithms that only run for a couple months or days, and people would complain that they always have to update the algorithms. Otherwise, the algorithms wouldn't be able to sell something, and so the elites are all in about being homophilic. Not only are first-generation Americans not really homophily, but they are also against nepotism and the saying that lineage is more important than skill. They also aren't sentimental, which means that their feelings won't get in the way of their objective decision. This is a huge win. And by that, you also know that you'll win by not being anything like the legacy or the legacy institutions, and they know that you won't be, and they are actively containing it at every sort of interval, instance, and position, even if you are physically altercating and winning, or politically or mentally winning. They are knowing that you will win. Because nepotism, provenance, sentimentalism, and the other things I mentioned are present in the #1 economy that runs human rights and all the opportunities, they create a vacuum that ultimately sucks up all the good ideas and throws them out until it can be safe and sound to have it done their way, in the lineage way and the legacy way. That's why high-value technical rhetoric and high-value technical literacy and literature is needed, which is why I'm making this video, so that we can profit off my ability to produce high-value content. It's what the channel's about, competition. Now, this creates market gaps, and there are indeed market gaps. There are market gaps between immigrants and the institutionalized legacies that everyone wants to be a part of. For immigrants, that I'll be focusing on is the inability to sell to these people who have lots of position and money within the #1 economy that dictates poverty, wealth, and status, and the ultimate reason to be called wealthy, which is the ownership of cash. The other gap that you can't really grasp here is the basic hygiene, which requires water bills. That is also a big sort of situation, because once you master basic hygiene, then you could be a decent person enough to maybe sell to one of these people who have a lot of money. There is also the uncertainty of social, political, economic, innovative futures that are always changing and can always lead to some sort of job loss because they didn't know themselves that the world was changing, or the socialism was changing, or the conditions were changing. That's a gap there that we can't really focus on. And there is the basic necessity where standards can be standardized against you. God forbid. Those are the gaps. Undervalued cultural assets by inferior or superior Americans, mostly majority, defame first-generation immigrants and first-generation Americans and their ability to sell because they can sell. And it's mostly because they're not majority Americans. And that's a problem that I'm going to discuss. By knowing that you can sell something, you end up being a cultural bridge, and that is something that you can easily be utilized and taken advantage for and of. You want to be able to make money wherever you immigrated from because you left your country, and they know that, and you're ultimately this reference is going to be a cultural bridge, and they are going to be trolls at the bridge and not let you. You trying to make money is going to be a show, and they're going to clap their hands and say, look at this guy trying to make money in my nation. And you know that the opportunity and whatever reason that you left your country for was because this country has given the reason to tell your country that they won't be making any money with their military presence, sanctions, and terrorists, and euphemistic terrorism that makes them number one. Every problem needs a solution. Some even wealthy Americans can't solve. But homophily, the niche sectors of social media, nepotism, sentimental value won't prove to the legacy institution that you can't make your abilities to sell to them and make money in millions a reality. It will always be against them because they're unable to, with or without devil's advocate identity, to fulfill their promises and goals to the majority of Americans that don't want the opportunity that they themselves have fabricated to be delivered. The friction of being a nepotism and the sentimental person and you're being an immigrant or a first generation American amongst these legacy institutions and legacy majority Americans is a friction that you can ultimately sell and capitalize off of to create a cash cow. You will not be creating a cash cow, but it is a cash cow that you will ultimately take advantage of. Because of their outright racism, it will be consistent, and you will be able to see that there is a consistency that most majorities, as someone that they've got, will try to sell themselves and say, hey, I got a job because these immigrants are so backwater that we need to fix them. One, you can fuel your country and make the money yourself just by supporting your country. All these customers are going to be your customers so long as you know this information. And it's because the first generation American or the first generation immigrant has come to the country that they are in, and they have created this safety net for you. But as a first generation American, you are defining American identities as someone who doesn't look American. And you don't have a safety net, and this is why you are the most interesting. You produce extreme excellency and extreme risk assessment. Although enemies are always learning, knowing the extent of your individualism is more or less because you don't have the safety net, and is a place where most majority Americans want to be. As someone who has safety nets, they are unable to achieve individualism, so they begin to explore culture and try to achieve an individualism that they will successfully try to sell to Americans and become rich themselves. So this is why you are valuable as a first-generation American and immigrant. There is a sterile laboratory where the top officials who represent your nation and how you ultimately present yourself physically without doing anything, I'm sort of Indian subcontinent, talk about the standards that they should currently uphold until they get further information and make them change it. That being said, you should know that the USA being number one and number one economy doesn't change it even when they get new information, only until majority has come to the conclusion to back up their racism that majority doesn't take the sentiment of you liking it when the whole Indian people were good and delivering on yoga and getting some. The sterile laboratory where the top officials talk about what is present and will be in the future is to deter and promote economy and to deter economic threat. You and your friends could have your entire month ruined because people up top have decided the future and present to deter economic threats and to promote economy because they decided that the new information they got was most relevant in producing a humanity that is most acceptable. But there is a solution to the lineage and legacy discriminatory sort of situation that is euphemistically understood as you're not going to get it. If you can continue on without the filter of legacy media or legacy institutionalized standards, social media will give you an opportunity to fulfill your own dreams because you are pursuing this unfiltered perspective of life. As mentioned earlier, if you are producing content without the filter of the legacy media or legacy institutions, you are providing a solution, and that is value. If you can't, whether it's family or friends or society, you can simply opt out. Instead of being left out, because then they'll say, haha, we got him to be left out when I were here back in New York City. We say, we don't want to go over here. We want to make sure that these taxi cabs or whoever these immigrants are, they know what the fuck we're talking about, we want the money. You can simply opt out. I talk about this in my books, and I have provided a formula in one of them, if you check out the Is game, and you will be able to find solutions and prime your mind into always achieving successful goals, even when all a majority outnumbers your minority, and you are still in a position of anguish because you can't achieve your goals because someone wanted to use freedom of speech and has his military in your country's waters to say that you won't be getting some. Not only could you opt out, but because you're a first generation American and trying to make money, you're also invisible, so monopolies all over the world won't even notice your implication. Unless you become so consistent that you're a threat, well, by then you're never going to be able to assimilate, so you have to start your own company and make money and have stocks and trust in the system that most people who are majority Americans are also against the legacy content or legacy institutions and rely on themselves. And that way you can ultimately utilize the most of what is available. When in and out of the legacy institutions like MAGA that is currently developing and brewing, which will be in the future, as I'm only 30 and I'm sooner or later going to be dealing with this, hopefully to move to Asia. With your help, of course, you can build long-term compounding interest in yourself by operating outside traditional nepotism. And it can be consistent with however you achieve it, but it has to be such that might end up being notorious or be felt of as a threat. But with consistencies of allies who also see that they can pursue their individual interests. This is not the same thing as homophilia, as I mentioned earlier, because you are pursuing your own interests under the dominion of number one military and economy that's never going to subdue or subside. You can begin a new economy that is forward and telling majority that they can't be achieving their goals unless you have nothing to do with anything with me achieving my goals. And that is something that's always being contained because, as I mentioned earlier, social media is an algorithm that wants to make money. And if you can't really have people stuck in this homophily where people are aligned with themselves or people like themselves so that the algorithm can sell something to them all together at once on the internet, then this won't really work. It's not like I have a problem with that. It's more or less the ability to make my own money and have these people actually buy it, opposed to saying that their ability to align with other people who also don't want Indian people or the internment camps of Japanese people or the slavery or the massacres of Native Americans to be in a position where they are purchasing from them. That's the problem. So the solution here is what I mentioned earlier, is to have an economy where people also see that you're an ally, not aligned with them, and you also just sell whatever it is you want to sell and make your own money. Even if the algorithms are like that, the algorithms could be beneficial in doing so, but we don't think the MAGA legacy, as it's continuing to grow, is going to change that. So sort of have to have an opposition that is going to be good, but we also don't want him to adopt it and start saying he can sleep with our women, because we don't want him to get some. He has his military in our waters, doesn't let us make money. You want to expand into arbitrage and developing an ecosystem against the legacy system, because the legacy system is something, and you might end up having to deal with associating with not being with them, associating with anything but their enemies and associating with them, because either option is not going to make money and you want to be a millionaire. That being said, being a social exclusion is sort of conditional, and it can be understood that you can get out, but people will put you there permanently because they know that once you start, you'll gain traction and you'll be able to sell to people and ultimately become a millionaire, which is what they don't want you to be a part of, any legacy institutions, to be a member of making decisions. So being in this isolation is a powerful tool as a first generation American or immigrant. First generation Americans and individuals live in two worlds. They have their families and professional lives, but they're most likely harassing their families so much that the professionals see that they should be accepted into the professional world because their families are somewhat not so pro-legacy institution. While the world is all about legacy culture, the loneliness will help you build skills, wealth, and status. When you are a part of the legacy institution and culture and not as a first-generation American or immigrant, your thoughts are often policed by the needs of preservation. You have no family to project within the country, and that's where you can analyze. Going as far as my research has told me that there isn't much you could do about having the situation, and there's also other information related to if you are against the way social media is run, you could be permanently banned and excluded from the money that is now standardized. People have lost their mom and pop jobs and everything is on the internet, and the internet has many algorithms. So Where do these leaders get their information as legacy elites to tell people in the companies that run social media what to do? They get emails and information, and you should always email them. Now that your phone is in your hand, you can send an email within 20 seconds. You might not be favorable, but they can deal with that unfavorable feeling and have you become favorable sooner or later, and you'll be assimilated into the culture. And that's what the best solution for this problem is. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.